It's the final test that any landing gear has to pass, and this really will be the last video until the electronics arrive, is ground clearance. And there's a couple of ways I can achieve that. Watch this. So if I drop this down, the lower I drop the tail, the higher that sits, which means if I actually get rid of the ski here, it'll give me a little more room. So hold on. Alright, so I've engineered this little skid so that as it's coming down, it comes just shy when it's sitting level of touching the rudder to the ground, which is perfect, and it comes just shy of hitting the prop to the ground. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect for landing, but this has to be slightly angled up, which will actually give me a slightly bigger angle, but it does allow for the prop to rotate. Now the other thing, I'm going to pull that off and show you one last thing that you should consider. Now when you build your landing gear, it's kind of flimsy, and you'll see that here. What you want to do is brace it one more time from here to here and from here to here. And when you're bracing it, that's when you're locking in your wings. So you want to make sure it's really rock solid and dead level. Take your prop off so you can really eye it up properly. Line it up and install that. It's actually really easy to do, so I am going to do it, and I'll come right back and show it to you. Alright, so I'm going to give you guys a final walk around. I do have the ability to add another ski to this. I can prop it up more. You can see I have a little sandwich where I've just added piece on piece on piece, partly to make it more of a spring, and it's actually a much stronger landing gear now, guys. So I'm going to show you. Here, let me pull this off. And let me show you the bracing. All I did was make the two pieces the same size and then try and brace it so that the wing sits dead level. And as you can see, it was a success. I have a little tiny tail skid on the back. Now you might be tempted to make that bigger, but you don't want it. And the reason you don't is you just want it big enough to hold the tail off the ground. That's it. Now I want the skis just barely tall enough to hold this off the ground, and that's it. If technically I make a landing, it's pretty much an emergency, and I'll be off the prop, which means if it did hit the ground, that wouldn't be a problem. But I want to point out one thing. So it looks good. It looks like I could just put the prop on it and use it. And technically I could, but this is the problem. As the plane wants to rotate, it's going to hit the ground. So if I were to try and take this off like this, it would have an immediate prop strike as soon as the tail came up, and that would kind of wreck your day, which means it's hand launch only. But when I'm coming down on a landing angle, presuming I touch the tail skid first, which I usually do, and make it a nice 3-point landing, this will never be an issue, because this is actually going to be pinned back just a touch anyway, and it gives it just that little bit more ground clearance. But because of that, I want to avoid a prop strike. So the last part of engineering your airplane, not technically, but the last part of engineering your airframe anyway, is to make sure that your prop is going to clear the ground. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how many people neglect that step completely and end up with a plane in real life that has the propeller way too close to the ground and ends up with a prop strike when they make their home-built aircraft as soon as it rotates. That's what we call it. Now you'll notice the landing gear doesn't really change much, which is good if it's going to be on skis. Say for example, I took it off from, say, snow like I have outside right now. This would just take off. But as you can see, I just have this built up a little bit. I don't actually have this finished yet. I am in the middle of making even bigger skis that will sit about this long, come out nicely in front of the aircraft like proper skis should. And as I build up my landing gear, it gets stronger and stronger and gets better and better lift. So this is actually looking pretty good. It's solid. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be close. And this looks really close to my eye. So that's a good sign. I've seen so far, even without measuring, if it looks close, it's close enough. If it looks close to perfect, that is, then it's close enough. If it looks off, it's off. and you don't want that. But this really does look close to perfect at every angle. This one looks like it might be a little farther out than this one, but when I go to look at it and I take a quick measure with my eye of the amount of distance between here and here, and then I look carefully at this one and look at this distance, it pretty much looks exactly the same. Everything looks nice and symmetrical. So when the skis are done, this is engineered. It'll sit about here. And that will give me plenty of prop clearance, even if I wanted to take it off from snow, which it's actually being engineered to do. I might one day put floats on it if it has enough power and flies as well as I think. Right now I've seen that it flies incredibly beautifully, slow flying like this. I'm not going to throw it. It is 5:30 in the morning. I don't want to wake my roommates up. I've been up all night working on it. To do the whole project basically, but I went from parts and a mono wing design to a completed biplane design, tested, built, and good to go. New VGs in the inside of that wing, a whole new wing to start with. Today has been a very productive day on the build series, and I've shot enough videos today it could take me the next month to upload them, guys. But in the end, this is looking absolutely beautiful. Not only does it look good, but I just made my landing gear a lot more solid than it was before. This is actually a lot more solid than the old one was before. And I'm going to put a ski on it too, and you'll see that later. So that will be one more video I can do, I guess, when my ski is finished. But I have to say, it looks really beautiful. It's sitting level, and I keep trying to imagine what this is going to look like when I paint it. And with the struts in place, and the bracing, and the skis, and, you know, the motor and all that, it's going to be really sweet, guys. I'm actually really looking forward to it. There's some dirt on here for me having had dirty hands when I built it, but that easily washes off and cleans up. I am going to make a new tail. I find this one kind of flimsy and crappy, so I'm going to pull that off, and I'm going to actually make a much bigger one that comes out to here, so it has a nice heavy tail. I want it to have almost as much surface area as it has for the elevator. So that's another thing that'll be an update video. But for now, this one's done. I'm not going to keep throwing it. I've thrown it enough and shown it flying well enough that, believe me when I tell you, this little bit of weight isn't going to stop that. In fact, these are on an angle where they will actually provide some minor lift as well. So they compensate for their weight with small amount of lift, which the ski setup does in general by having this little lift wing in the middle to brace it. So between the bracing, and you can see, I mean, that's actually pretty stout, believe it or not. It's nicely sprung. It's actually really nice right now. Beautiful. But this is all double braced, guys. Okay, and when I put my floats on it, if I put floats on, the floats will be braced as well. And then, but this is all a good setup for that. And all it is these little corners of this material folded in half for the main struts. And then all of the other pieces are just one single piece of foam cut to square and put in place. And it's so easy to do, guys. These little pieces are so easy to make, and it makes its own little spring suspension, and it's a great design. And the more I kind of came up with what I wanted in my head, the more I knew it was going to be absolutely worth sharing. You guys are going to love this. I'm going to end this one here. But like I said, the main duty of the landing gear is to absorb shock and to keep the prop off the ground. If it doesn't do those two things, it's a failure as a landing gear, guys. And a lot of people make the mistake of making this too big. And when you do that, you put this on a shallower angle, and all of a sudden you got prop strikes. So you want this just barely having the tail off the ground, so you still have up authority. You don't have to go down. You can't dive when you're on the ground. And if you push down just a little bit, you'll actually be pushing this off the ground with this control surface. Just like this. You could literally push it up off the ground. But right now it doesn't have the ski on it, and when it does, it'll sit about here. The whole thing will sit just that little bit higher, so you have to account for that. And I expect it to be about that high off the ground instead of where it is now, which will actually put it at the perfect height, guys. So I'll still be able to add some down elevator, and it'll be enough that when you push the down elevator, it'll be pushing the tail up. Not so much. When you climb, you're doing this. if you're diving, you're doing this. So you're not going to be doing this on the ground. So you're going to go from here to here, which will be perfect because if you look, you have lots of space underneath to be able to pull up is easy. And I'm just going to add the ski, and once I do, it'll be the perfect height. You guys will see. But for now, all that's missing is the final set of skis at the bottom. That'll give me another a few millimeters off the ground, maybe 1.5 mils. And that's all it needs. That gives the prop clearance about 3 millimeters of clearance, which is fine. I'm perfectly content with that. Also, I had it with the motor on top because it mounts here. But if I mount it the other way, well, son of a beach, look at that. Look at the amount of prop clearance that gave. So make sure when you align the prop shaft, you're not aligning it to the bottom. Put the motor on the bottom, put the prop gear reduction setup on top, and now look at that. It literally CGs perfectly, guys. It's not actually touching the ground. Look at that. But the way the landing gear is made, it will sit naturally back like this, which means it's literally ready to spring up off the ground and fly, which means if I keep it like this, I don't need to do anything as far as the height goes. This is plenty of height off. I can foot my finger under it. That's tons of room. And now watch carefully as I put the tail up. I'm going to put you guys in an angle. You see how that comes down fast? So you need to make sure that you can put your tail up to where it's going to fly, like about here, and still have room underneath the prop. And I still do. In fact, the tail can come way up right to level, and I'll still have a little bit of room. But right now, I'd be in danger of putting up a prop strike when this starts to come up. But knowing this aircraft, when I put the prop on, it'll come up a little bit and then take off. So I won't have to worry about it. But just to be safe, I am going to have the skis on there, and they're going to sit about here. So it'll never, ever be in danger of a prop strike. So that's it for this video, guys. There's really not much else to show you. When the skis are done and the tail is redone, I'll show you those. But for now, it's all just simple stuff that you can do. It's basic logic, basic planning, and it's all been done for you. All the testing is basically done for you. And you'll have to redo a bit of that. But, I mean, hey, right now, it's a bit tail light. But once I put the little skid on it, and I put the weight of all the servos, this will sit quite securely on its landing gear. I'm not worried about that. It's got enough of everything it needs. It's got enough lift. It's got enough drag to be a slow flyer, but enough lift that it won't just fall out of the air. As long as the prop is turning and I have any kind of throttle on at all, it'll fly really nice, guys. That being said, this one's approaching 13 minutes, and I'm going to cut it there. Also, I will point out that I could make these just true ailerons and make these little inboard guys flaps. I have them top and bottom, and I could dial in the same setup I have here, only in miniature, on this inside, which would actually work really well, and then keep these perfectly level and make them work. Now, you see how this is? Okay, that's too tough. You don't want it to be that difficult to move, and it's only that difficult to move because I need to take a tiny trimming off of the edge of each one of these so that they're free flowing. You want them to be as free moving as possible, guys, and that's really easy to do. You just make sure that there's not a lot of resistance to movement, and partly that'll come in the way you make your hinges. Partly that'll become how much of a gap is here. Helps a lot. If these are rubbing, you don't want that at all. So I will cover that in a little more depth when I actually set this up. But there are lots of other people out there who will show you how to do it. This is really just an engineering channel. So I design cool stuff. Okay, fair enough. But I didn't design it so that I alone could have it. I designed it so that I could put out a sick design and other people could enjoy it. That being said, this is my biplane design. This is the Dragonfly. Ala Keith, and I love it. So don't forget, it's still going to have some skis, and I've got landing gear coming that has wheels, so when the winter goes away, I will take the skis off and put wheels on. Keith out.